Prathyusha, it's a pleasure to have you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me, Matan. I'm so excited.
So, we have been talking about AI throughout the conference, and of course, Gen AI after that. It's very gratifying to learn that from a young talent like yours to understand what are the ethical consequences of this, of AI, and how can we make sure that any technology evolution that happens that has major consequences on the population around the world, how do we instill the true values from the get-go so it's not abused at the later stage. So I wanted to learn from you, first of all, your perspective of the evolution of technology. You have done your undergrad and your master's both from UC Berkeley in data science. So I guess one of the best persons to ask about, how do you guys perceive evolution of technology and the impact?
No, thank you so much for having me, Matan. I just wanted to say, we're talking a lot about Gen AI nowadays, and I want to say, it came up so quickly. When I just completed my master's, actually, in December, and the most powerful the most powerful NLP technology at the time was BERT. And so within a couple months of me graduating, I'm suddenly hearing LLMs are the new future, and I was thinking, man, if I could stay in school for a couple more years just to understand, where is this growth coming from and how are these new models evolving? But coming from a risks perspective, really the best way is to think about it from ground zero. Right when you're building the product, it should be the very first thing you think about. Right now we're seeing all the implications of what's happening when you're not careful to consider what kind of data you're using, right? Is it biased? Is it a balanced data? Are you representing each of the populations you want to represent? I don't know if you've been hearing, coming from a purely Gen AI photos perspective, because I'm coming from that kind of background, is a lot of artists' rights are being kind of violated because we're using their data without asking permission. And so coming from there, that from ground zero, that's something that you should think about. You should be careful you should know where the data is coming from. Is this good data? We call this vegan data. Is it a data set that we know the source? Or is it unknown data that, will there be implications down the line? This is kind of, I liked it earlier when we were hearing one of the speakers talk about how Gen AI is kind of like a roundtable discussion. It's not just an ethics, it's also a legal issue. If we're not careful about the data we're using, we could get sued down the line. And then it's also like a UX customer service issue. Who is addressing all these problems and making sure that we're on top of it when something comes up. And so I really like that kind of roundtable perspective that we saw.
So, coming from Berkeley, it's not unusual for people to assume that you have an element or more of activism in you, because of the. So the question then is, how do you take this to a work environment, right? And then try to kind of advocate for this.
No, that's a great question, and funny you said that. I wasn't actually much of an activist until I got into Berkeley. With that, I think coming out of Berkeley, and I realized that it's not necessarily the first thing people think about. Ethics, accessibility, these are important issues that kind of come up in retrospect. And then if you think about the engineering paradigm, it's always easier to make changes earlier on, and then it takes more money and more time to do it later on. And so as you're going about it, you should, if you see something, find your personal board of directors, find your mentors, someone to support you, and then call it out and work on it. That's the kind of culture that I've been also working in for my first job. Is if you see something, say something and then work on it. You can only be the change that you want to see.
So I said it in a lighter tone about Berkeley, but it is not without reason that Berkeley has been #1 public university in the country, right? And I think we should all have space, and Berkeley does that really well. Give space for all kinds of voices. It should be heard. You don't have to agree with everything. So that's what I like about that particular campus. I'm sure there are a lot of other schools who do it around the country. So coming back to our topic, I wanted to understand, with your current generation, do you see some very stark differences between men versus women in workforce, in technology? It has been in the works for some time to balance it out. How do you see that? And my second part of the question is, what do you think we should be doing to make it more flat?
Yeah, actually, there was that great women's event that happened here at the IIT Bay Area Alumni Conference, and I think they said a lot of good things about paying it forward. And I think that's also kind of my principle. Is I only got here because I was able to have my allies, my fellow members who supported me throughout the journey. And women are underrepresented, even in my engineering classes. It's better now, I'd like to say, but still, we're still the minority to a certain extent. And the best way I found is to have supportive organizations, pay it forward. If you see a junior that's kind of trying to maneuver this field and they don't really know what's happening, help them out. And I found like that's the best solution.
Okay, it's been great talking to you, and thank you for coming here, and wishing you the very best.
Thank you for having me, Matan.